anybody doesn't know, Melissa, Tim, a lot of other people are part of the HR science community, where we try to find different HR voices that maybe aren't getting as much screen time as we would like, and try to really promote them, try to really challenge HR as a space, try to sort of push it forward and sort of do different stuff. So if you do have anyone in the audience who would like to speak, if you have something interesting to say, let us know. If you know of anybody who has something interesting to say, let us know, and hopefully we can sort of, bring more of them to the forefront, because there's so many really smart people out there that, just aren't sort of getting their voices to a large enough audience, and we want to change that. There are some really cool people that do have big voices. There's a lot of really cool people that don't. So it's a lot of what we're doing, both in live sessions like this, also in panels, and then also in scripted content. So if there's like a message that you want to get out, that you want to sort of just sit down and sort of craft something, or a training, we do all of that type of stuff. So definitely reach out to any of us or anybody else in the community. Yeah.
Questions here. I'll share my screen just to make sure that it's working proper, which I think should be that one.
Yep, looks good.
Yep. All right, so introducing myself. I am obviously Jesse. My background, I am not proper human resources. And actually at the conference that Tim and I were at, I kind of introduced myself as HR adjacent. I'm an employee experience strategist, and so I spend a lot of time with HR and a lot of time with technology. I'm a human-centered believer in how we enable technology, and spend just an inordinate amount of time kind of connecting parts of organizations to another. I also am our internal head of employee experience, and I'm going to share a little bit about that journey and kind of what we've done, what's worked, what hasn't worked over the time. I do like to play with AI all the time. I'll share the prompt for anybody that wants it. This is ChatGPT taking that picture and then creating 5 different variations of it. I had to tell it specifically that I have red hair. It wouldn't believe me. I always came out with brown hair, and ChatGPT definitely overestimates my ability to both style my hair and grow my hair that long. So that's my introduction. Please feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. I love to network.
Awesome. Any other brave souls want to share a bit about themselves?
Well, my name's John, and I mainly know I guess I got in the orbit of this through John Kelly, and I've been in the people analytics space for about 10 years, but I'm currently between roles right now, and I'm looking for new opportunities in people analytics, preferably a full-time employee role, but also consulting opportunities should they present themselves.
I talk a little bit about people analytics. I want to dig in a little bit on kind of some shared stories there for sure.
So I'm Nat Bulkley, so I guess we're almost neighbors, which is great. And I like your term HR adjacent because my career has been a mix of big companies, GM and Pfizer, and then independent consulting. And the core, it's people analytics, lots with organizational network analysis. Ooh. And my dissertation was with email and some of the early work, and then I've used surveys a lot more. They're complementary, and always being on top of how the technology is evolving is really important. And so I'm really looking forward to this, and really interested in learning more about your work. I appreciate this whole forum the way it connects people.
I do not oftentimes get to have a deep O&A discussion with people, and you being 20 minutes from me, I suspect we'll do that in person at some point.
Oh, absolutely. That would be fantastic.
Sorry, my
Well,
computer had crashed. So I just want to welcome everybody who just joined the call recently. We have Jesse talking to us today. We're going to have a really great conversation. Jesse had met Tim at an event, and Tim was able to pull him in, so we can have a lot more context of some of the important things within the HR technology community. Jesse's currently an SVP at Rightpoint and had worked at Microsoft before this. So give it away to you, Jesse.
let's see, who else wants to introduce? Is it Zoheb? I see you're on camera.
Sure, Jesse. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zoheb. So I'm based in Windsor, Ontario. So that's the border city to Michigan. So I see those wonderful buildings across from this side of the border. I work as a consultant for stability. So we help clients implement UKG technology and even user adoption. I like to work at the intersection of HR technology, processes, and employee experience. And most of my experience has been in the implementation space of HR tech, that is SAP on-premise, as well as success factors implementation. That also with addition to running HR service center experience, a lot of process transformation work. And my interest with the HRSI group, as I did attend a seminar last week. And what I really like is this is not, if you are looking to get out from the traditional HR thinking and work at the intersections, this is the space. And I really like to meet other folks working in this space, but that's where I would like to be in. Thank you so much, everyone.
Excellent. And either Neha or Connie, did you want to introduce? You don't have to, but if you'd like to.
Okay. So my name is Connie. I work in the nonprofit industry. I am a beginner in employee experience and human-centered design and data analytics. I'm trying to steer this ship of the nonprofit that I'm affiliated with, and it's actually a network of nonprofits, to invest more time and money and more talent in analytics and just in the employee experience in general. So it is a hard thing to do. There's never enough money and focus in the nonprofit world on taking care of your people. It's always about the mission, but the mission is only done with your people and through your people. So that's who I am. I'm here to learn and to listen in and to I guess increase my learning, my expertise. Yeah, I've done a lot of research, quantitative and qualitative, into the employee experiences, satisfaction, engagement, hope, resilience, and things like that. But it wasn't necessarily as part of a organizational department. It was like more, for academic research and things like that. But yeah, I'm trying to combine the two areas into, more of an applied, research where I can guide organizational strategy and, improve the workplace for people in nonprofits.
Yeah, I think nonprofit or not nonprofit, I would argue there's never enough money put into the actual employee experience. And attaching to the mission, I have this conversation in the more generic sense of like CX to EX. And I'm a technologist by trade, but like the issues aren't technology in our space. It's always how the technology is applied to people. And I argue with people all the time. I was like, you will never outspend a bad employee experience for your CX. You just can't do it.
And the customer experience will only be as good as your employee experience.
Yep.
And
absolutely.
that's a rule of thumb I wish anybody and everybody in customer facing industries and in, mission driven industries would know and would understand and would invest more in their employees.
Everywhere you are, say that really loud for the people in the back. I love hearing that. Excellent. So what I'm going to share a little bit is what we've done. So I am a technologist. I spent a lot of time with Microsoft technologies over my career. And we had a feedback from our own company, and I'll actually progress the slide here a little bit, around needs for EX. And so, why did I take on the role, I think is and why did we create me separate from human resources? A couple of different reasons. One, I'm here. That's not normal for a lot of organizations. There's not usually a head of employee experience in my experience. So it was opportunistic. I do participate and have actually supported HR probably for the last 3 or 4 years on some of our initiatives that I hear from our Voice of the Employee engagement surveys. And so we kind of moved into that a little bit. I've also been probably one of the closest partners with our varying HR leadership teams over the almost 12 years that I've been at Rightpoint, in kind of understanding our culture, and our vision, and how those things come together. Most of the images that I generate, you'll see I just use DALL-E to make those. My premise is most employee experience are just what happens when the rest of the org happens to an employee. Now, they're not particularly orchestrated, that there's a lack of connection in many ways. But the better experience is when your organizations are centered around the employee. When we do technology discussions all the time, we do as a consultancy, I think we do a very good job of making sure the technology gets used. And a lot of our tech partners are always ask us, like, well, what is your strategy? It's like, well, we just ask people what they need. And then we just make the tech do that, right? Instead of trying to make people do what the tech does. And so that's kind of why we started out. The other thing is there's a balance in expectation of role. As human resources, obviously, we have a balance of role between company and employee, and right or wrong. And regardless of what it actually is, the assumption for many employees that HR is always more balanced towards corporate. And mine is not that way. And it's not that I am unbalanced, at least in this sense. Right, I understand corporate vision and what our strategies are and how to attach, but my primary remit is the employee. And so our relationship is one of kind of creating balances between the org. I also have a strong partnership with our IT org, just based on the nature of my background and skill set. And so that kind of 3 pairing of IT, HR, and myself, as well as kind of my connection to the ELT that I'm on from the leadership team, creates this more functional focus on employees. The other kind of maybe unexpected thing that I've gotten over the last year, we have Voice of the Employee like most everybody else, right? We do your annual surveys, and then we have some smaller ones that happen throughout the year. But there is feedback that's being given directly to me as a channel that is not being funneled through the recorded systems. And one of the things that we've talked about is what is the trust of that's happening? Like, why is that channel working? And we're kind of working to understand how do we better create and funnel feedback to make sure that we are acting on the most priority items for the org and as well as for employees. So just kind of giving a sense as to why employee experience kind of adjacent to HR. That's why we undertook this journey for ourselves. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we've done, what worked, what didn't, where we think there's opportunities to kind of work in the future as well. Anything, questions or comments, or does that resonate? I know having an EX person is somewhat unusual.
100% resonates, Jesse, and this may be in your presentation or it may be for Q&A afterwards. I'd love to know how you positioned creating that role and sold it in terms of the being HR adjacent. It's the connection, with the business. That's basically, there are probably similarities. It's always been, my experience had always been in being in positions that were essentially protected, because that's not a normal thing, as you point out.
Yeah, I think obviously, other than the fact that I'm here and I've been here for a while, I have a benefit. And this is true of what a lot of successful EX roles have to be. I am deeply connected in our work. So when you're trying to do cross-functional or across silo collaboration, which is really what employee experience management is, having that kind of connection is critical. So the part of the issue oftentimes we run into is like, do you have the right person with the right connections to be able to facilitate this kind of cross collaboration that has to happen? I didn't have that problem, obviously, being here for as long as I have been. The other one was our voice of the employee, like very directly. And I think maybe the difference between some engagement surveys saying we need a better employee experience, and Rightpoint saying it is I am in the ear of most leaders at Rightpoint saying that already. So when they heard it, they kind of knew there was a connective tissue to, I say that, would you, so you say it, so maybe you could help fix it, right? Like that's the thing. But I think one of the things we've been working with other companies is for people that want to be employee experience is like, how do you get that conversation a known entity for leadership so that when they hear these types of things, they can translate to it. The HR adjacency thing, and actually this was one of the questions that I had in the conference that I wasn't really sure how it was going to go. I was like, I don't know, we had a room of 50 or so. It was like, raise your hand if you think HR owns employee experience. And there, not one. And I'll be honest, I was a little surprised. Like 0 people raised their hand. I was like, well, that's interesting because most leadership teams I talk to think you do. Right? Like if you talk to your CEO, they think HR owns EX. Right? And IT also doesn't think they own EX. And I'm like, well, so, like this is why oftentimes you'll see it's like, well, then nobody really owns EX except for the employee and their manager. They know exactly what the employee experience is. And when you see struggles or burnouts with people managers, a lot of times it's coming down with the fact that like you haven't really done anything other than give a bunch of Lego blocks to these teams and saying, assemble the best thing that you can out of that. And then you see this inconsistency of delivery and quality across teams and orgs. So you're kind of getting a sense as to how I talk about it. And frankly, at Rightpoint, I think it's just I've talked about it for so much that they're like, yeah, you just go fix that, right? Like this is your problem now.
I think you're spot on. Who do you report to? Who's your sponsorship? Because sponsorship is always key. I mean, not the specific person necessarily, but what department?
I have reported to a few different places. Right now, I report to the COO.
Awesome.
I've reported to the CEO. I have never reported to the CPO or the CHRO, and that's intentional. But I either in the delivery or the strategy side of the org has been where I typically roll up to.
I find it, I like the fact that you have technology as central to the employee experience. And based on my experience in employee surveys and employee listening, a common plight in most work organizations is employees are dumbfounded in the sense that they are saying to their employer, you hired me to do a job, but you have put all these petty obstacles in my way that prevent me from doing my job. And that in many organizations, technology is viewed as an obstacle to get around. I mean, think of all the times that you've referred to coming up with a workaround or with something based on how the technology is structured in your work environment. And It sounds like that, at least with your approach, you're trying to get beyond that and use technology as an enabler of the employee rather than something that obstructs the employee.
Yeah.
Could you speak to that?
Yeah. So and it actually goes two different directions. When I'm talking to my HR partners, it is more about getting more technology understanding in kind of our HRBPs and what have you to understand like how do we leverage technology more effectively. When I'm talking to technology, and you'll hear me rail about this all over the place, is like stop with your technocentricity. Just stop it. Right, like you're never gonna. It's never gonna work. I'm 25 years into this. I'm tired of it. Stop buying something from a vendor that says, "Well, this time you get to not understand what your employees do, but it'll make everything better." Spend more time in change management, and so I push my IT orgs, internal and external, like spend more time on understanding your employee needs. Bring the tech to the need, and so I think it's kind of both in that relationship. I also work with our IT teams. Look, sometimes you have to do stuff for security reasons because we have security needs and it's not the best employee experience, right? But you have to manage the discussion. It's like, okay, like why are we doing this? How can we maybe balance the needs of the security and compliance, like Gen AI being a big example of that, but also meet the needs of productivity and efficiency for our employees. And I think it's really just looking at that lens as another consideration in those changes. Measurably making one thing better by making something else worse is really kind of what I'm trying to say. Is like that you have to balance these things. Like if you're going to do this and everybody now becomes less productive,
Yeah,
that hurt the business strategy part, right?
And in my experience, I see a lot of IT teams taking a very maximalist line about cybersecurity to the exclusion of any other value, such as efficiency or employee experience. And there isn't real, like the discussion stays within IT, and there's no real business-wide discussion of what the trade-offs are or what the downstream effects on employee experience or getting work done.
Right. Right. And that's kind of what this, I was like, when you do that, and sometimes you have to, right? Like there are certain security things that you're just not going to get away with these days. And you do that, well, that's going to have an impact on the business strategy and outcomes. And it's also going to have an impact on potential employee engagement. So this is not normal, right? This is not what the current state of most orgs that I work with. And it's really saying, one change is going to impact these other changes. You're going to have an engagement impact when you do something that's introducing friction into the system. That friction might be causing issues from a revenue or growth perspective, right? And we just need to make sure that we're decision making across those lenses at the same time. In an organization where HR and business strategy and tech are all tightly coupled in partnership, you don't see as big a gap. But a lot of times operationally, especially in larger orgs, you'll see the siloed nature of things start to happen. And you have decisions that are being made without kind of the impact of it. So that's kind of what we're doing. It's also what I consult other people they should be doing. Some of it works, some of it hasn't. And I do want to talk a little bit about that. Can't get away with the conversation in the last 2 years. So I'll talk about Gen AI. We're no different. Big sale, and I'm a Microsoft partner too, so it's going to do a lot of things. And my first reaction was, but it won't matter unless we know exactly who it's supposed to do that for, and why it's going to help them. So what we went through, and I kind of used some kind of dating my career here a little bit, but when you moved from links to search, that was a new thing. And search was so much easier that it got quick adoption. This is the same type of consumer event we're seeing on OpenAI, ChatGPT, and all the other ones right now. But moving from navigating to keywords, kind of people learned that one over time was pretty quickly. Learning how to do Gen AI properly with good prompting and content control and validation, that is a new muscle. Most people want to ask for something and get it, not ask for something, get it, and then validate it. And I think that's a big jump that we have to work our way through. And it is actually proving a little difficult to get people to break away from how we trained them over 20 years to search for stuff, to now just ask for things in a way that you would ask somebody else. And so that's something that we're doing. It's a new corporate muscle. Things that we've learned along the way. You need, and I'm going to start all over the page here, and you can have this afterwards. You need to understand and train people on what this is and how it works. Just baseline understanding, what the expectations of you are going to be, where you need to be able to spot a fake response. How can you maybe ask it differently? And then we moved from that to peer-to-peer. So we do change programs as a lot of people do. So like small pilot groups, and then kind of change peers or champions. Our championship structure was our delivery teams. So once we had a baseline of like, how do you use a technology, we then brought in project managers, designers, developers, testers, all the different roles, and said, now change how you work using this technology. And then once you're ready, we'll roll it out to your broader group with you as our champion, with examples of specifically what it will do to your job. That part is where I think most of your technology deployments struggle. What is it specifically for me, right? How can I use it? And how do other people use it? Who can tell me about it? So we started with a pilot group, just like anybody else. We identified pretty quickly that in our world, it is our sales and project managers that are going to have the most obvious benefits. The meeting organizers, anybody that causes lots of meetings, for sure, that's an obvious target. And then people that create content. If you've ever had to fill out an RFI, you will love Copilot, right? It's great to not have to do that in the way that we've done that in the past. And then using some data for those that love O&A. I'm sorry, there's a little bit of an echo on my side. We use a tool called Viva Insights. It's a Microsoft data tool that allows us to kind of identify and understand where we have strongly connected people. I have a very deep and broad network, so I am an influencer by data in our network. And who else can we reach to make sure that we're getting our change program out in a way that will hit enough people to be able to hit kind of critical mass adoption? So we're still rolling out Copilot, but we do think we've gotten a lot of good use cases on roles in their rollout to be able to kind of drive that. We also identified we really only need about 45% of our company.
Sorry, Jesse,
I
you
got
were muted.
Yep, I'm back. We found that there was only 45% of the company that we really need to target this technology toward, because they are the ones that are going to get the most value out of it. Entirely different Gen AI technology for a lot of our other teams. So that's kind of our model. The partnership for us, and I think a lot of this comes because I have a technology background, we knew with technology that this was going to show up at some point. Our human resources team had noticed in our surveys that there was definite feedback towards needing more efficient ability to kind of generate and discover content. And I presented the case to the EL team, our leadership team, on here's what we project will be the case. Here's what we believe our rollout plan is going to look like. It's going to take us about this long to be able to measure some outcomes and efficiencies. So that's your mandatory Gen AI discussion for the year. Everybody has to have one. One thing I did note in the conference and a couple of other ones since then, I obviously, being a technologist, have a lot more comfort level with this discussion than a lot of my HR peers and partners do. And I think that's been something that we've been encouraging, is like getting more familiar with like what are the capabilities, how might it help. And we also partnered, and I see your hand, and I'll come back in just a second. We also partnered with our HRBPs to craft a co-pilot specific learning track. We use LinkedIn Learning as our kind of primary tool, but we supplemented that with kind of basic LinkedIn learning path with our own curated content and research that we use, and some onboarding guides that we've created for different roles. And we're using that as a kind of, to use Copilot, you must go through our learning track as a way that we're onboarding people through. And then they join the community of our champions and kind of can collaborate with the rest of the people that are in that pilot rollout. So I do see a hand. Melissa, is that you?
It is. Actually, what you just said is super interesting. So to become a champion, you almost get to select yourself in versus being chosen by the organization. But my question,
yeah, 100%.
that's cool. That's really cool. Because influencers often get too much. You get overloaded, and you're like, why am I being picked for everything? But you said something a few minutes ago about, I think you said 40 to 45% of the organization is what you figured out you needed to target for adoption. I was a little bit curious what's the methodology of getting to that 40 to 45%?
Yep. So when we broke down into our kind of groups, we started doing, it's like, how often do you use this? What are you using it for? What value is it bringing to you? And we have a pretty strong and sizable technology team. The Copilot that our technology team really needs is GitHub, not Microsoft Copilot. So when we're looking at the set of activities that they do on a daily basis, yes, they have meetings, but they don't need the meeting summary tool because their project managers have it. Right. So that, like, we just kind of balanced where we were seeing the value and usage across those roles. And we may change that over time. I mean, the thing with Copilot is it changes pretty much every month on things that it can do. But we had to make an assessment, like, where do we want to put our initial investment, and just choosing the ones that had the most high value, most impactful time savings use cases is what we used.
Cool.
And if somebody wants to know what that means when I translate to ELT, time savings is cost avoidance, unless it's sales, in which case I'll go after revenue directly. Nat has a physical hand up.
I was looking. I was looking for the other hand. On the AI training, I'm just curious in terms of the developing the training, key skills, concept-wise. There's, as you mentioned, validating the responses is really key. The other one I was curious was prompt writing.
Yep.
With the queries that I come, my background is in this flow of information. So the information retrieval people are like, we've been doing this for 20 years and the librarian interview and all that. Are those the two big buckets? Are those the two big buckets in terms of, what you're teaching people to be really good? Are there any other buckets? And I just wondered if there's anything in terms of how you went about developing the training. The key.
Yeah, and actually, I'd be happy to kind of share over the high level of our learning pathway for the group if that's useful for anybody. But we did go through trust and validate. So responsible AI, understanding what it is, what it is not. I think one of the biggest issues with generative AI is it can just make something that's fake, and that's different than any other technology that people have had in their hands before. And then we do spend a good amount of time on, like, what is a good prompt, right? Because there's the quality of your output is almost, I mean, content in and prompt are the two things that are going to drive what your output is. And if you mess up your content in, your answer will be wrong. And if you mess up your prompt, your answer can also be wrong. And so those are the two areas that we focused a lot. And then we moved into examples, because it's like that. It's a lot easier. It's like, this is a good prompt. This is a great prompt, right? This is what this will generate for you. This is what this one will. And then it goes into more community knowledge sharing. Like I have a thing. Did anybody find something? So less maybe structured knowledge sharing and more organic or tacit knowledge that we use to kind of build people through. But I'll happily share that over as like these are the types of courses that we run people through just to make sure that they have an understanding of the basics. Excellent. And the other, I mentioned Viva Insights for influencer data. Viva Insights is also, it is probably my favorite employee experience data set, especially when it's combined with engagement surveys, because that gets me a good qualitative, quantitative measure. Challenge I've always had with qualitative is I can't really tell where and why that issue exists just off of qualitative. The challenge I have with a lot of organizations is qualitative is not taken all the time at face value by leadership teams. And so what I will come in and do, and what I did in our discussion here, was I'll bring the evidence. Nothing I enjoy more than having data backing up my arguments coming into a discussion. So what we saw, and this was probably not, this was the same as every other company. This was the second year of the pandemic. Our engagement survey said, man, meetings are getting out of control, obviously, was for everybody. But that doesn't mean that everybody experienced that the same way, right? And like different people, different roles. And so what we went and did is I partnered with HR and I said, okay, well, let me find out what is actually happening. So we had the sentiment on the right up here on the upper right, like 53, too many meetings, they're unproductive, they'd like some time block, what have you. And I went in and looked and was like, yeah, we're spending an inordinate amount of time in meetings. All right. Like, and 28% of the company, the ones you're probably hearing them from, are well above 25. And we have to take a look at that. We ran that. So we went out, we proved the evidence. It was like, here's what we heard. Here's the evidence that backs that up. We put in this evolved RP meetings training, which is no different than really any HR meetings training stuff that we've done over the last 20 years, but just reminding people. And then went and measured. I measured it through my data quarterly for the next year and through the engagement data on the next engagement survey. And what we heard, and you can kind of see this, was a spike in the meetings being more productive and a spike in attendance being reasonable on how much time I spend in meetings, and a drop in I'm spending meeting in large meetings. And then I measured that. What was the actual change on the data side? Wasn't 100% victory. The cost of some of this was some of the higher part of the org ended up in worse meeting behavior, which required a different change process. But for the large majority of the org, we heard, I measured, we changed, we measured again, and said that's how you use data to drive employee experience decisions. And the thing that I am always talking to the world about is you didn't have to wait to hear that from your employees. You could have been looking at how work gets done and kind of assumed that that was coming and made those changes before. But I do love combining those two data sets. It is a passive listening data set. There is a trust issue with that. It's not that, I mean, this is all de-identified data. So it's and in aggregate, just like any other HR system. But that doesn't mean people think that, right? There are key tracker systems out there that sell themselves as, are you like hitting your space bar enough times in the day to be productive? And we have to have that conversation, and we did, around privacy and trust. We have a purpose statement for ourselves, is like what we will use the data for and what we won't, and that actually applies outwardly to the companies that we work with as well. And once we got through that, we were able to use that. Now we've used some other data sets in here over time to kind of understand what other parts of the org are doing. This is the one that I can share more openly from our HR data sets, but it's been very useful for us in kind of data-driven decision making. I assume Nat would have a question, comment on that one.
I tell me to stop when I just love this. So that's excellent what you're doing in terms of data-driven decision making. And what it piques my curiosity about is that it seems like the logical next step, once you have a methodology like that, is to be able to have like horse races between compete. I mean, there are lots of different types of meeting training, and some are the best, better for different things. Actually using people analytics to help make better decisions about that. I'm curious, just your perspective on where you are and any other, like, like who are the best companies in that? Because it makes no sense to me.
Yeah. Well,
It's like they've got it, they have to convert.
Yeah, this
but
is
where are we?
very, very early. This data set for people analytics is the one that I see used the least. And as before I was in my employee experience role, I actually ran our Detroit office. So like I was a people manager and a business manager and all that. When I got my hands on this data set, I was like, how did I make decisions without having data to make those decisions? Right? Like this is giving me information and insights as a people manager that I just didn't have. But if you go to IT isn't looking for this problem, right? They're not actively out there trying to find a new problem to solve most times. Don't have the budgets to do it, right? What have you? And a lot of times HR isn't using this data set either. It's a passive listening, not an active listening. So some do, and you'll see those out there. Like PayPal did a great job on theirs. Our parent company, we worked with them on using it and combining those types of things together. But there, a lot of times, I'm introducing it to the conversation. Like we should be using this. Is absolutely something we should do. And one of the things that I've kind of taken on as my remit is to go into more HR conferences and HR spaces and saying you should be using your passive listening responsibly with your active listening to be able to drive behaviors. The other thing that I would note here, there's levels to that. Meetings, that's your entry level, right? That's the first thing you're likely going to do. Manager behavior is probably following that. But when you start using this to get more in depth, we noticed a connections issue, which we would call a cultural cohesion problem during the pandemic. People were drifting from people, and we could measure that digitally, and we could intervene in a GDPR compliant way to say, hey, you need to connect with your team. Maybe you want to connect with other people. Maybe you'd like to know people that are outside your team. And the ability to kind of weave that fabric of connection. This is O&A data. And we'll probably talk about that one offline. You got different levels of how you can use that data to be able to drive organizational impact.
Jesse, I'm really glad that you came today. This is exactly the audience that wants to be doing these analytics, and we want to be sort of pushing more of this. You have about 10 minutes left. So
Thank you.
what other stuff? Yeah, definitely. What other stuff do you want to sort of bring to us? Because like this is the audience that like wants to drive in and try to bring this type of data, back to our populations.
So I talked about LinkedIn Learning already. So we kind of went in and we're actually building a partnership model between our HRBPs and our people managers to kind of drive that in. The other thing I want to share is like not everything works out in tech. I'm a huge knowledge graph person as well. I love a good connected knowledge system. And one of my favorite products was Viva Topics, and how it was able to make our ability to connect things easier. It didn't make it. It ended up being on the chopping block in many ways, probably because large language models are going to do it better. And the lesson here in working with IT is that's okay. Right? We took a shot at it. It didn't work. The moment it was retired, we shut it down. We'll put our investments somewhere else. It is hard sometimes to be able to do something you can't guarantee the outcome of in organizations where budgets are constrained everywhere. And we're no different than that. But the learning from what we got out of this was there were certain types of people and content that we had to organize better. And so we've been applying that learning to our Copilot work. and how to organize better. So I just, not everything works. I don't bat 1,000. In baseball terms, I guess I bat pretty good. But when we're doing it, we try to push the bar pretty good as a culture of like, here's some innovative tech. Let's try it, see if it works, experiment with it, not be afraid to move on when it doesn't. So that was the end of it. I know you said we have a few minutes here left. Maybe go to open Q&A.
Definitely. We could probably do maybe 2 or 3 questions depending on how long they go, but who would like to jump into it?
John, I have a question. So the whole employee experience, the fundamental, the way it's working is with the technology, right? So as an organization, what level of tech maturity one needs to have to do this, knowing that not all organizations have that budget for technology? Because this is great, but I'm thinking, will this work for a mid-sized company, like under 500 employees? Or like, how can they apply a similar concept, like if it's your small business, or if you are someone that doesn't? And again, we know other thing, being on the other side, being in HR tech, I knew on my team I was the only person in HR who liked tech, and the other ones were like, no, you take care of that. So knowing all these factors, how do you go about doing this in an organization that doesn't have that tech maturity and all these, the budgets and the size? I'm like, is it something that you would want to only consider this? Oh, it's only good for an enterprise. Forget about this. So how do you kind of make this a business case for all different size of companies?
Small or big, you start with skilling. Clearly we have an advantage because we are a technology consultancy and we have knowledge inherently in our learning on how to deliver things, and we apply that to ourselves. If you do not, and this is kind of what we engage our customers with, is I'll oftentimes talk to HR. I was like, turn the skilling conversation inwardly, right? But like, what types of skills do we need to develop in our HR team that are technically relevant to the role that we can use to kind of upskill? And the same is true of any of these technologies. When you're going to onboard with Viva Insights, like, what's your learning program? What do we put out? We're a meritocracy, Melissa, to your kind of style of learning. Like, anybody can want to learn anything. And it's really the energy you put into it that determines whether you're going to be a champion here. I know some other orgs might be a little bit more top down on that model. But we always lean into learning. And I think the interesting thing, and probably the superpower that HR has, is the learning capabilities. And how to impact the org in trying to undertake one of these journeys. Because if you're starting out a little bit less informed on the tech, that's a learning problem. And some of this is time spent, right? Like, how much time does your IT team have to learn on new technology and all that? Some of it means you might need a consultant to come in and map out the value statement to your leadership team for them to buy into that, right? Like, you might not have that skill, you might not want to learn it. Some of the stuff you just, like, if you're building it, and we see this a lot in Gen AI right now, maybe it's not worth me knowing how to do it. I just want to use it, right? And doing that. But that's really the balance. But I would go to learning inwardly toward HR to maybe get more HR tech, and outwardly towards IT so that they can become human-centered designers, or at least human-centered thinkers. And that's where I would go.
For anybody who likes learning, this video and all the other ones that we have are on our YouTube channel, which is just HRSI. So you can watch this recording when it comes out, probably within a few days, and all the past ones. But Jesse, can you talk to us a little bit more about, like, how do you show like the ROI for learning? A lot of those programs are really expensive. They sort of, somebody might upskill, but sort of bringing that back to leadership, right? If this is the first thing that we're doing, we put a lot of money into it. How do we sort of prove that it was successful?
Yep. And I'm going to go, if I can, real quick, all the way back to the beginning. An investment in learning is under HR's budget. And if we haven't connected that learning to the people that are using that learning to drive either better adoption of technology or outcomes to business strategy, then you will always struggle. And this is where we see, and it doesn't matter, is it HR learning, is it customer service, is it like whatever that is, if you don't know what it did to the people that use it and their role, then you cannot measure the impact, at least not in a causation sense, to leadership teams. And so I think the human-centered nature of us, which is just how we are, so it seems kind of obvious to us, but maybe it's not all the time, is what is that doing to somebody's role? Did it save them 3 hours a week? What is the value of 3 hours a week for a project manager or a seller or a developer, right? And then you translate that into either revenue, cost avoidance, or in some instances, customer NPS or something like that. Translate that up. I do think translating EX investments is the hardest thing in companies. And I have a lot of CX peers, and they're like, yeah, we struggle to justify our investment too. I was like, well, your revenue, right? If you're struggling, like what are we doing? So it's not easy. This is not the easiest part of my job. But it is revenue, it is cost avoidance, and it is um, customer scores, customer sat scores. And I say cost avoidance because it's not always can we lay off people, right? It's can I not have to hire a whole bunch of new people in the next 3 years, right? Everybody always says do more with less. It's like, well, I have what I have. How do I do more with that, right? And how do I make sure that we are optimizing the efficiency and output of the teams that we have? Some organizations, some of the more mature ones that I've seen, they measure in the aggregate, right? So that like if you measure your total output of whatever you do, like widgets per month, and you're making changes into the system, are those changes impacting the kind of total widgets that are output per month, right? And kind of using it that way. But without getting it down to the role, it's very difficult to say like this helped that group do this better, and that doing that better is valued this way. So learning is my one recommendation. The other one is spend some time understanding what your employees do so you can communicate what we do to them in an effective way. I think you might be surprised a lot of things that we do that aren't connected to them don't make their job easier. A la the workarounds that somebody else mentioned earlier on the call. I have a new tech. I'll have to figure out how to do it on my own time. You get some adoption out of that, but it might not even be good adoption, right? Like certainly might not be the best.
We have time for about one more question. You want to go, Nat? Go ahead.
Well, but if anybody else has a question, I've asked a lot, so let me open it up. Otherwise, I have to find a question.
I think you can go ahead. Don't worry about it. Yeah.
So I mean, this is a deeper dive on where we were on the showing the value. But the methods exist to, like show lift, to evaluate, do A/B testing of training programs,
Yep.
do things that, I mean, I understand from, the econometric background how, difficult it can be to do attribution, but you can triangulate, that's the nerd stuff. The methods exist to do these things. It's the conversation with the business, the CFO. They don't learn that stuff in CFO training. And so I wonder, am I on point that conversation is critical? I mean, where you sit under the COO is perfect. But, I wonder first if that's kind of on point. And then I think it's wonderful the way you're getting that out there because it's game changing if you're able to start really evaluating the contributions. Where's the impact in a way the business that understands of the kind of work we're doing and learning people are doing and so forth.
So there was a recent survey I saw from another employee experience group that I work with and talk to. The relationships of EX practitioners to the org. The very bottom one was finance. Finance is my first relationship. They have the money, and you are right. They are not trained in their like learning on how to quantify this type of value. Am I 100% successful at it? No, right? Like I don't win every argument with my CFO or anybody's CFO. But communicating it in terms of EBITDA, ROI, or profit, or efficiency, or cost avoidance, right? You have to learn to speak their language. It is one of the more critical relationships to be able to get there. And I think this is true of HR too. Like, how do you justify your new tech system? How do you justify your new HRIS? How do you justify your new support system? I can tell you what doesn't work is sales stories that come from vendors. Like, CFOs are not friendly to that usually. So that's a relationship I think is just underinvested in widely, and one that is very, very critical to being successful. And I can maybe, if I can take a note here, I'll see if I can find that survey that I saw that was interesting.
Definitely. Jesse, I want to thank you one more time. I really appreciate you coming on to it. I think, at the core of what you're talking about, of really rethinking what employee experience is, right? And especially the sort of negative baggage that HR has with that. I do see a lot of HR teams trying to move against that bad balance of being all on the company side. But we need a lot more of that, right? And I think it's really interesting sort of taking that out and doing that separately. But this was a really great conversation. So I want to thank you for coming to this. Thank you everybody for joining. As I mentioned, we do have a YouTube channel, so join HR Sci to see more great videos like this after the fact. We have a LinkedIn group that I just put into the chat, Human Resources Science. And with that, you'll hear about upcoming ones. And then just the last thing is that we have a survey going on right now, because we just want to understand the audience.
Oh, looks like John might have frozen again. All right, well, I know we are at time. Thank you all very much. For those that want to reach out, I did to your LinkedIn's. I will connect after the meeting. Thanks, everyone.